by the boys and everything exceptional learners. This event is hosted by Ferris Aspiring Educators of Michigan and RSO on campus. There is a QR code in the slideshow that gets going behind our panelists with a quick form for you to fill out if you didn't before to register. It just is to help us with our data and numbers after the event. We are so happy to have you all here tonight and interested in such an important topic in the realm of education. We have some great speakers tonight who are special education professionals. We have Jason Gilchek with us from Big Rapids High School. Monica was unable to make it. Danette Crozier is a Ferris State University social work professor. And lastly, all the way from Hillside Middle School in Kalamazoo, we have Anthony Barnes. And unfortunately, Jake Schumann was also unable to make it tonight. Tonight we have some questions prepared to ask our speakers, but when you, the audience, think of any questions that you have, please feel free to raise your hand, and when the speakers are ready for another question, then Becca, our moderator, will call on you.
Thank you so much, Alex. So now, before we dive into the depth of our topic tonight, I wanted to kind of define some of the stuff we're going to be talking about. So I want to ask you as a panelist, how would you define the term exceptional learner that's been on the rise in the past few years in education?
Go ahead, Vanessa.
Do I need to use a microphone? I'm loud.
If you're loud, go for it.
You don't. That's all the years in elementary school. So I just want to clarify, I am a professor of social work at Ferris, but I was a general education social worker and a special education social worker. So I have over 20 years in the education before coming to Ferris. And to me, an exceptional learner is anybody that doesn't, it's a person who doesn't fit traditional learning styles. So it's not just children that we would typically think of are differently abled. In the field of social work, we don't use the word disabled. It's in our code of ethics to work on saying differently abled. But it's also young people that I consider to be gifted as well. And that's a forgotten group often in K-12 anymore. It used to be pretty when I started. I'm much older than most people in this room. But when I started in the field of education in the early 90s, we actually focused on those students that were higher in ability. And they've kind of fallen by the wayside quite a bit over the years. But to me, that means anybody that doesn't fit what maybe is average.
I would agree with that. When I think of the exceptional learner, exceptional child, I agree. We often forget about the gifted and talented. It actually, special ed is a spectrum, and all that special ed means is that you don't learn within the molds of what society and what the curriculum sets, right? So anyone who has a different learning modality, whether you learn faster or slower or whatever it is, you're an exceptional child. I was actually just having this conversation the other day with my fiance, who is a gifted and talented teacher, and I told her, because we're professional enemies, because we're on the opposite sides of the spectrum, and that she's stealing money from my budget. But nonetheless, it's really just anyone who learns differently and forces the teacher to differentiate. Now, teachers should be differentiating anyway, but sometimes you need that label, sometimes you need that piece of paper, whatever it is, to kind of, I don't want to say force a teacher to differentiate, but to define what exactly a particular student needs. So it's really just anyone who needs that extra love to make sure you understand the curriculum.
They hit the nail on the head with everything, but I can add to that. When you get a classroom, you're going to know who those exceptional learners are, the ones that both of them were just talking about. But it's going to take time, it's going to take patience, passion, and a purpose. You're going to have to build rapport, not only with that exceptional learner, but you're going to have to build rapport with everybody in that classroom. And it could take a couple weeks. And you might feel that you're not getting anything accomplished, but those first 2 weeks, even to 3 weeks, those are the most important weeks of your trimester. But just like they said, just to continue with some of the words and verbiage, we keep using the word specialized instruction. We don't really use, the learning disabled, like you said, or other things like that. I'm trying to think there was something else I was going to say with that, but I know in a lot of our IEPs, those are the words we're using. And then when we have those conversations with parents, we have to ask ourselves, what type of specialized instruction do they need? And then it gets sticky because some of these kids get ready to be exited, and the parents are fighting tooth and nail to keep those kids on an IEP because they're kind of afraid. And so we have to have that difficult conversation. Is there any specialized instruction going on? And a lot of the kids I'm seeing right now in particular, there's not much specialized instruction going on, which would necessitate an exit from special education, but those parents are scared to death because those kids have had an IEP probably since 2nd or 3rd grade. But what I see, going from your middle school to my high school, working with those kids, something clicks from 8th grade to 9th grade for the better, and so a lot of the behaviors will go down, and a lot more learning occurs. It's kind of a cool, phenomenal thing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And now, while these two are very similar, there's obviously a lot of differences as well. Otherwise, they wouldn't be called two different names. But what are the key differences between an IEP and a 504?
Let me hammer this. Okay, so the other part of my job is I'm a clinical private practice therapist, and so for many years I sat on the table representing the children at the school, and now I'm an advocate. One of the biggest differences that a lot of times students don't understand is that a 504, first of all, they're not under the same law. The 504 comes from the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, Section 504. So it's not and where IEPs are under the federal law, IDEA. And the difference is a 504, if you're on that, they are not they're not changing the curriculum. It is the same that child has that everyone else has. They're changing the environment. So maybe they'll get more time, they'll get a preferred location to take their quizzes and tests, maybe an extension on homework, maybe a reduction, they don't have to do 50 problems, but they still have to do the same caliber of work. And where students with an IEP are entitled to supplemental services like OT, occupational therapy, physical therapy, school social work, which is what I did, but it's not only changing the environment, it is also changing and differentiating the curriculum to meet their needs. So there's a lot of difference, and I'll tell you why I'm passionate about it, because in public schools right now, a 504 is a peace offering for a lot of cases. Well, I'm sorry, they don't qualify for an IEP, but how about we'll put them on a 504? It is not the same. It is not the same. It is not the same. And that's where I come in as an advocate and start pulling out the law. Like, no, that's not gonna cut it. They do work for some, and I'm supportive of them, but they shouldn't be used as a consolation prize, and they are often. That's a hot one for me, because I see it happen a lot, and it's very frustrating to me how that happens. I see a lot of young people that don't get their needs met, and they have to fight really hard, and it shouldn't be that way.
As a special ed teacher, I answer this question all the time. For parents, teachers, whoever will listen. And 504s, the first thing I tell them, especially the colleagues I work with within my building, 504s are not my job. Now, obviously, as a teacher, I will educate anyone. I will help anyone. I will support anyone. That's my job, right? But I get called into meetings and say, hey, will you interpret or explain this kid's a 504? No, that's inappropriate for me to do. It's not a special education document. It's not my job. And a lot of what 504s are also used for, at least they used to be used for, is those temporary accommodations that you needed. So you break your hand, right? You can't use a pencil, you need a special accommodation. Now nowadays, you don't really use it like that as much because you have computers and so a lot of those universal accommodations are built in. But they're not the same. An IEP is way more in depth. An IEP is way more in depth. I refer to a 504 as an IEP light, right? extra light. It's got some of the same components, but really the real meat and potatoes of the IEP is not there. And a well-written IEP, probably at least 20 pages, give or take. Some of it is, stuff we don't write, it's just the fluff that goes at the end. but it's a long document, whereas a 504 is maybe a couple of pages.
And they're all different. Like the IEP is regulated by law. It has to have the
Right.
7 sections in it, and you go through it. And a 504 is somebody making it up on their computer off of Google. Like, let me just, pull up a template. And so there's no consistency. So I would imagine if I went to your district and saw a 504, it looks
It would
very
look very
different
different.
than the district that I live in, right? And so it's not that they're bad, but they're definitely not. They're not the same.
And the thing that a lot of people don't realize about 504 plans is any business or school or whatever it is that receives federal funding is liable to follow section 504. So what that means is if you have some type of disability, or you need some type of support, and your place of business gets federal funding in whatever way, shape, or form, you could have a 504 plan. So as a college student, you can have a 504 plan. As a grown adult working in an office building, you can have a 504 plan. Let's say you have some type of muscular problem and you can't stand for very long, right? So it makes it very difficult for you to be a cashier at McDonald's because you can't stand for very long. However, you can do that exact same job sitting on a stool. In theory, you can get a 504. You can write it yourself or have someone write it for you. Write a 504 plan, submit the 504 plan, and they have to provide you a reasonable accommodation. Giving you a stool is a reasonable accommodation, right? Buying you some kind of cool mechanized thing that makes it so you think the orders and it punches in the computer, that's not a reasonable accommodation, right? So even as a teacher, I have a teacher in my building who has some medical concerns, some medical issues that she's dealing with, and I wrote her a 504, even though it's not my job, right? But as a union member, I wrote her a 504 plan to have her class removed to be closer to the staff bathroom, because that's what she needed. And we have someone who is ready to cover her room if she has to make an abrupt exit. So you can do that, whereas an IEP, there's an evaluation process. You have to have some type of label and have to be evaluated every 3 years, if not more, depending on what your label is. And so they're very different.
And the IEPs, by the way, just so you know, they automatically end. Federal law is they end at when you graduate high school or 21. The state of Michigan is 26. But if you get a high school diploma, you're done. If you get a certificate of completion, there are services that can be provided up until age 26. So when you have a federal law, states can be more strict, but they can't be less. And so they couldn't say, oh, we're gonna end it at 18. No, the federal law says an IEP goes until 21 or until they get an actual high school diploma, where the 504 is lifelong, as long as a person needs it. So there is some good things about a 504 for sure.
So our district is pushing 504s.
Well, of course they are.
They're pushing 504s. You do need a doctor's note, doctor's evaluation, if you will, in order to be eligible for a 504. It is a legal, still binding document. But just like they both said with the IEP, it changes, the IEP changes as you progress from elementary to middle to high school. Once you get to high school, there's a whole nother thick, big, huge section that's probably more important than the rest, and that's the transition piece. Where are these kids going to go once they graduate? Do they have the ability to hold a job? Do they have the ability to live on their own? Do they have the ability to go to college? Do they have the ability to go to a trade program, the service? So there's a lot of meat and potatoes to that IEP once you hit that 9th grade year. Trying to think what else.
One of the key parts too, when you get to 8th and 9th grade, is they want the student to is expected to participate, and that's really, I think in the district that I was in a long time, we encouraged that at a much younger age than that. Students should be a part of advocating for themselves, but that is also something that's really helpful as for a lot of you that may not know this, the vast majority of the students that I've worked with in my career on an IEP are of average intelligence. And let me repeat that, they're of average intelligence and they don't know it. They go through school feeling stupid because somewhere along the line, no one took the time to really explain to them that they might learn differently than others. So there are students that are on an IEP, I'm sure, in one of your classrooms that have probably a higher IQ than I do, but they have some learning challenge that makes it so they can't read, or they can't, they reverse their, something that makes it